The large number of English words that originally come from Arabic is proof that for centuries, innovation came from the Muslim world to Europe and not the other way around. These words include coffee, sugar, soda, magazine, candy, alcohol, rice, lemon, cotton, sofa, mattress, traffic, sheriff, cannon, canal, average, zenith, and zero. And there are quite a few more. So why did Islam decline relative to the West? First, in the 1000s and in the 1100s, Muslim clerics tightened their control of schools and universities. And they insisted that 7th and 8th century texts, along with the Quran, control major decisions because these texts were closer to the lifetime of Muhammad than contemporary texts. And this rigidity calcified Muslim thinking. But the Islamic world fell further behind the West because the Turkish sultans wanted to control the flow of information in their empire. So they outlawed printing presses other than their own until the 1790s. Europe had printing presses from the 1450s onward, so Europe had a 350-year head start modernizing over the Muslim world. Even today, Saudi printing presses are only partly free. A 1963 Saudi law still on the books forbids any criticism of the government, and the Minister of Information has the power and occasionally uses it to fire a reporter or an editor. The turning point when the Saudi press moved from not free to partly free was the tragic girls' school fire of March 11, 2002. It began when a teenage girl who was smoking saw a teacher and quickly threw her cigarette into a pile of trash. During the fire that followed, 835 girls tried to flee a school that was built for 300 with no fire escapes and with bars put in the windows to prevent the commingling of sexes. 17 fire engines arrived, but religious policemen refused to let them enter the school because the girls were not wearing their veils and therefore were not supposed to be with men. The firefighters argued with the policemen. They said, the religious policemen, they said this is not the time for religious strictness, and finally they entered the school anyway. But in the meantime, 15 girls had been trampled to death. Mecca's newspaper, Al-Nadwa, the Forum, published eyewitness accounts and scathing editorials without first informing the Ministry of Information. And then across Saudi Arabia, other newspapers did the same. In the nearby city of Jeddah, a huge headline in Okaz, the country's largest newspaper, blared, "The girls were killed by pure negligence." And for the first time in Saudi history, the press forced the resignation of a high official, the director of girls' education, who had called the fire God's will. Crown Prince Abdullah, who today is the king, said the deaths were caused by the negligent, incompetent, and carelessness of officials, and he took girls' education away from the direction of clerics and merged it into the previous all-male Ministry of Education. And as you may have read, last week, King Abdullah appointed a woman, Noura al-Fayyaz, as deputy minister in charge of girls' education. Ever since this fire, Saudi newspapers have regularly run articles about social issues such as women's rights, unemployment, school curricula, drug abuse, and crime. But though Saudi newspapers are free to publish social criticism, they still cannot print articles that criticize the royal family or the Wahhabi branch of Islam. In Jeddah, for example, a severe sewage problem was never reported because the corrupt official involved was a prince. Because the vast majority of Saudis have access to the internet, the Saudi government also blocks thousands of websites, although many young Saudis know how to get around these blocks and openly online call the Saudi censors jackasses and other insults. The majority of the sites that the government blocks are pornographic, but it also bans sites devoted to drugs, alcohol, gambling, dirty jokes, gay rights, religions other than Islam, Zionism, and criticism of the royal family. Yet the Saudi government has also spent billions of dollars to ensure that every school in the kingdom has plenty of computers and that every student has access to the internet. The situation in Saudi Arabia is the same as it is in China. The governments in both countries they fear the freedom that the internet brings, but they're also determined that their young people be a part of the modern world. Despite censorship, most Saudis are quite content with the royal family. When I lived in Saudi Arabia in 2004, and when I traveled there again this last summer, I asked every Saudi if there were an election, and there were three political parties, a royal family party, an Islamist party, and a Western-oriented reform party, how would the election go? And I got almost the same answer from everyone. 50 to 60% for the royal family, 35 to 45% for the Islamists, and 5 to 10% for the Western-oriented reformers. Now, many people in the West, from Rupert Murdoch on the right to filmmaker Michael Moore on the left, want the Saudi royal family to fall. But the alternative to the Saudi royal family is not an idyllic Arabic-speaking version of the Swedish parliament. The alternative to the royal family is a Sunni version of Iran's Shiite theocracy in control of a quarter of the world's oil. We are lucky that the Saudi royal family is there and that they are our allies. I'd like to spend the rest of my time here telling two wonderful old stories, discuss four modern trends, and then take your questions. But first, I want to tell you about an Arab immigrant right here in Virginia who emailed his son, who was in college in New England, and said, "My son, I wish you were here because it is time to plant the tomatoes, and I am too old and tired and frail to dig up my garden." And the son emailed his father and said, "Dear father, please don't dig up the garden because that's where I buried the thing." Next day, the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Virginia State Police dug through every square inch of the garden looking for the thing. They were there from an hour before dawn until 2 hours after sunset, and they finally went away when they didn't find anything. And a few hours later, the son emailed his father and said, "Dear Dad, I trust by now the garden is all dug up." The founder of the modern Saudi king was Abdulaziz, also known as Ibn Saud, who at age 26 stormed the town of Riyadh, and then with just 60 men, and then conquered 80% of the Arabian Peninsula by 1925. He was smart enough never to provoke the British, and he left alone the coastal protectorates of Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Muscat, and Oman. In 1905, when Abdulaziz ruled little more than what is now metropolitan Riyadh, he got a reputation for wisdom by judging an unusual case. A man had been picking dates at the top of a palm tree, fell out of the tree on someone and killed that person. And under Arabian law, it was the widow's right to demand the date picker's death, and that's what she wanted. And the king said, "Wouldn't you rather have blood money from the date picker's family? You'd never have to work again." And she said, "No, he killed my husband. I want him dead." And the king said, "Well, do you think he did this on purpose?" And she said, "I don't care if it was an accident. He killed my husband. I want him dead." So King Abdulaziz was silent for a long time. And then he said, "It's your right under our law to demand his death, but it's my right as king to decide how he's going to die. This is how he's going to die. We're going to tie him to the bottom of the tree, and then you're going to get up to the top and fall on him and kill him the way he killed your husband." Now the woman was silent for a long time, and then she said, "All right, I'll take the money." Now, 8 years later, in 1913, Abdulaziz learned that Macedonia and Albania had broken away from the Ottoman Turkish Empire. He knew immediately that if the Turks could not even hang on to these nearby European provinces, they would not be able to hang on to Al-Hassa, the coastal desert region between Kuwait and Qatar. And so he gathered 300 warriors, and they rode camels for 2 weeks till they got to the town of Hofuf, where there was a huge fortress with 1,200 Turkish soldiers inside. And as Abdulaziz suspected, the Turkish soldiers were way too demoralized to fight. They took one look at this warrior force and they said, "We're out of here, this fortress is yours." Now in 1913, nobody knew it, and no one would know it for decades, but a quarter of the world's oil had just changed hands from the Ottoman Turkish Empire to the Al Saud family.